Peace, peace, peace. My name's Sam P.K. Collins, Washington and former staff writer, who, as of earlier this year, started covering the DC Council, and it has been quite an experience. As part of an effort to bring the DC Council to our readers, we are doing this special live broadcast this morning with none other than DC Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, who is in the middle of a budget season, as we all are. So today, expect a lot of information. We're going to make this as fun as possible, as fun as the budget can be. We're going to get into what the next 50 days or so look like. So, Council Chairman Mendelson, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Sam. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So let's get right to it. Last week, Mayor Bowser, she presented her budget proposal. As a matter of fact, it was her and members of her administration. They presented the budget proposal before you and your colleagues at MLK Library. We have 20 billion on the line, and there was a 1.7 billion dollar deficit to close. And from what she said, she had to make a lot of tough choices. But from what I read in your letter that came out not too long after, you said those choices were to the detriment of working class Washingtonians, Black and brown Washingtonians in particular. Would you mind speaking more about that?
Yeah, so it's a bit cliche, but budget is about choices. It's about priorities. The city has less revenue growth than we expected. That's a little complicated the way I said that. It's not that our budget for this coming year is less than what it's been, but rather it's not as great as we are used to with revenue growth year after year. And so what the mayor has done is she's made some choices, which is cut back programs pretty much across the board. I mean, there's hardly anything that's untouched. And some of the cuts, I think, are the wrong choices. For example, not only is she cutting emergency rental assistance, which this year has run out of money halfway through the fiscal year, and we had $43 million budgeted. And what she's proposed is about $8 million for all of next year. I think that cut is not sustainable if at the same time we want to keep people housed, that is to continue to reduce homelessness. We've got to have emergency rental assistance for those who are living at the edge and suddenly something happens and they can't pay their rent. At the same time, she's also cutting from roughly 30 million to I think it's 20 million or less, the Civil Legal Services Program, which is also called Access to Justice, which is a subsidy through the Bar Foundation to organizations who employ attorneys who represent the indigent, the poor. So for instance, Bread for the City, which will help folks, low-income folks who are fighting an eviction or are fighting to get some sort of benefits, whether it's from the DC government or the federal government. And what we have seen over and over is those who have attorneys are more likely to succeed to avoid eviction or to get the benefits. And the Civil Legal Services Program provides attorneys. That's being cut. So not only is emergency rental assistance being cut, but then the ability to get lawyers, to get a lawyer through these nonprofits to stave off eviction, that's also being cut. Another area that's being cut is school budgets, and looks like you had a question, so why don't I defer to you, and then I can talk about schools for the next 20 minutes.
Yeah, I also saw that there were eliminating inspectors from the Department of Buildings.
Yep.
And we got other aspects to touch on. I wanted to touch on the housing piece a bit more. What was your take on Mayor Bowser's statement during the hearing? She said people are back to work. There may not be much more need for reliance on rental assistance. I sort of asked her the same question. I was a bit more convoluted on Wednesday, but no matter how much you make in DC, it is pretty hard to make it here. 30% or more than 30% of the rent burden for a lot of people. So, what do we make of that? In a year where, for whatever reason, the revenue is down. What do you make of a statement like that? Is it?
Well, I thought it was a good answer, but not a correct one.
Okay.
I mean, Yeah, folks are back to work, but at the same time, thousands and thousands of people are rent burdened, and by that I mean they pay over 50% of their monthly income to the rent. That's the real number that counts, not what the unemployment rate is. And there are, as I said, thousands of people who are struggling to be able to pay their rent from month to month. Um, the You mentioned the housing inspectors, so that's another aspect of life in the district. Is that a lot of folks, particularly low income folks, live in apartments that are not well maintained. And if we want to ensure some basic quality of life, then we need housing inspectors who will go out and cite housing code violations in rental property. It's been a struggle the last few years to get DCRA to do a better job. One of the things we did was the council, broke up the agency into two, one of which is Department of Buildings, and the Department of Buildings has the rental housing inspectors. We've also been struggling to increase the number of inspectors. So last year, we increased the number to over 100 to do not only rental housing, but also illegal construction. And it's been hard to fill all those positions. And so the unfilled positions, the mayor's cut. The positions are still needed. When I have oversight hearings, folks come in and talk to me about how they're on a per capita basis, there are more rental housing inspectors in Baltimore than there are in DC. So we need to increase the number of inspectors. And even if it's hard to fill, this is not the time to be cutting the vacant positions, but rather to be filling them.
And if we could just go back real quick, I want listeners to get an understanding of what caused the revenue to get a bit lower, or to be anticipated to be a bit lower this year. What were our prominent revenue streams in the district?
Well, the most of our revenue streams, which would be income tax and sales tax, those are the biggest, are actually growing. We're seeing more tax revenue from those sources. On the property tax side, which is the third big source of revenue for the city, residential property taxes are going up, but commercial property taxes are not. And actually, what we're seeing is that downtown, because of the vacancy rate, that the commercial property tax values are going down. I think the CFO estimated about a 15% drop. I've talked to some business folks who say that they think that the drop in value could be as much as 50%. So that's where the struggle is. And the mayor is right to be putting some emphasis into getting the federal government to send its workers back to work, because that will in turn increase demand on office space, but also will bring more demand for retail and for restaurants. Everything is struggling downtown. Not so much around town, but downtown, yes. And that's where we're seeing the drop in value.
So as far as investing in housing down there, my understanding is that in order to attract developers, there's going to be no TOPA rights for the next 15 years for housing down there. Am I correct in saying that?
For downtown, yes. And that correlates to what developers have been saying, that it is hard to attract investors. The way development projects typically work is that a developer gets investors, and then at the point that the project is complete, transfers the property to another investor who will hold the property. And it's that transfer that's subject to TOPA, that's Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, and that investors are wary of having to go through that. It's a drawn out process. And I was with one of the first tenant associations. I was a tenant and was one of the first tenant associations that exercised TOPA. And TOPA was for long-time rental housing projects that the tenants were facing eviction, not really to cover new developments downtown where there's a transfer of ownership from one investor to the next. So I'm not so bothered by that. I do think that the mayor's desire to get more housing downtown is good. We need some mixed uses there. But that's not the way to recover downtown quickly. Those projects will take years, possibly a decade, before they are complete. And we need to get folks back downtown now. Reopening the federal government, that's a strategy. Dealing with public safety downtown and around town, that's a strategy. Creating more arts activity and just what we call activation, that's a strategy. Those are more immediate, and I'd like to see more emphasis on that.
So very soon we're going to pivot to education, but I did want to speak about the emphasis on public safety downtown. My understanding as well is that there are cuts to violence interrupter programs. I wanted to get your take on that. Is this the year to be doing that? And from what I heard, I understood the rationale as far as the execution of the program and where the resources are diverted. But violence interrupter programs, they are a bit polarizing. Some people believe they are effective. Some people want more straightforward solutions. But these people have been creating relationships in communities affected by violence, and they are laying the foundation for stopping, hood abuse or whatever the case is. How do we go as far as building upon that momentum? Is this the year to cut back on that, or how do we go about doing that this budget season?
Well, you're right that there is some debate about the effectiveness of the violence interrupters. And the solution to that debate or controversy is to do some robust assessment of what works. We have several different kinds of violence interrupter programs, one through the Office of Neighborhood Safety Engagement, another through the Attorney General. We need to have independent and rigorous analysis of what's working there, and that'll answer the debate. But with regard to whether this is the year to be cutting back, folks are concerned about public safety. And let me be clear, I live in the city. I'm not afraid for my life. I think the city is safe, and the city has actually seen far more crime in the past than it is today. But that doesn't change the fact that a lot of people feel the city is unsafe. And when it comes to public safety, perception is reality. So we have to do more. And the size of our police force has been dropping. It's about 3,300 officers now. It was about 3,900 officers for many, many years. In fact, for most of this century, I think 3,900 is a more comfortable number, although there is a study to see what is the right number. So we need more police. The council has supported the mayor's budget requests the last couple of years, and I expect we will this year to fund that. We need other strategies like violence interrupters. We need to be doing everything we can to assure the public and that the city is safe, and actually to change the perception that the city is not safe. I was looking at statistics over the weekend because I have to testify before Congress, and the congressmen are all going to say that the Republicans are going to say that the city is lawless and dangerous in the wild, wild west. And the statistics don't bear that out at all. But at the same time, we know a lot of folks are very worried, and we have to deal with that. So the short answer is we need to be backing resources for violence interrupters and public safety, and then doing the analysis.
So to that point, totally understandable in boosting police. And this might not be a question for you, but like in terms of what do we see as the purpose of police? Because I hear two different philosophies. Police, I hear from people who are a bit concerned about police presence that police are more effective in following up, the crime rather than preventing it. And I travel through Ward 8 and Ward 7. They often talk about officers sitting on their phones or sitting in their cars as crime is taking place right across the street from somewhere. And we might have touched on this on another occasion, where you budget for something and then how that manifests in real time might be different from what you intended. As somebody who's seen a lot of budgets over the course of your career, what's the best way of going about making sure that these dollars are being spent correctly? And that can be not only for the police, but for anything under the DC government, you know?
Well, let me answer the first question, which was about what's effective policing. I'm a strong believer in community policing, and that is where the police go out of their way to develop relations with communities, the communities that they serve, and to build trust and to, and you know, the lighting here is getting weird. I may have to get up and close the blind. Um, the building trust, and that makes such a difference in the police officers being able to fight crime. When the community trusts them, the community will be a partner. And that comes from community policing. So I think we need to see more of that and less of people feeling that police are occupiers and are just a source of harassment. That's not effective policing. And that's not what we want. In terms of more broadly ensuring that what we're putting in the budget is effective in service delivery. Um, you can see the lighting's getting weird. I'm gonna get up as soon as I finish this question. The you know, it first falls on the mayor. The mayor is responsible for running the government, and so the mayor is responsible for making sure that programs are actually delivered. What we're paying for is what we're getting, but the council, through oversight, can try to expose where there is waste or ineffectiveness. We've seen that with efforts to try to get DGS to do a better job with our schools. I've been struggling to get the now Department of Buildings to do a better job with housing inspections. The council doesn't run the government, but we can, through oversight, bring sunlight into what's working and isn't working. And I can hear you, but I'm going to walk 5 feet and lower the blind.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So while you're doing that,
What's your next?
I've been hearing a lot of questions or a lot of requests for education related questions. So in the time we have left, I do want to pivot to that. Before I cut you off earlier, you expressed your concerns about the ways that schools are being funded in this budget proposal. I was hoping that we can go more into that whenever you get a chance.
Sure. Lighting's a little better. I am very, very concerned and actually on the verge of being angry with the mayor and the chancellor over the way they are budgeting for schools. What I've seen over the years is that schools every spring at budget time are told that they're going to be cut. And oftentimes that hits hardest on schools that have a large number of at-risk kids. And at-risk is a fancy term that we use essentially for kids who live in poverty. And those are kids that we know need more resources. There's a violence in their communities. They bring that to school in the sense of the trauma and difficulties with learning. So there needs to be more what I call social emotional resources to help those kids. And they don't get the same resources the kids in more affluent neighborhoods get. So there need to be more resources in these schools. And then they're cut. And then the chancellor gives BS answers about why they're being cut. Like, well, if an enrollment drops, that's why a school gets cut. So let's take Flora Henley, which is an elementary school in Washington Highlands. Flora Henley is projected to lose 7 kids next year, but its budget was proposed to be cut about $800,000. That doesn't correlate to enrollment. So then the chancellor says, well, these schools had one-time funding, and so we had to, the one-time funding came to an end. That's why schools are being cut. So we looked at schools that had we looked at schools and backed out the one-time funding to see what was happening with the budget. And we saw budget cuts that were of the schools with the greatest cuts. If I remember correctly, it was 10 of the 12 were seeing cuts beyond the one-time funding. But, step back. A school that has one-time funding, so next year its needs aren't as great? No, the needs are just as great, if not greater. So that shouldn't be an excuse. What we've seen is that, if I remember correctly, when the chancellor released the initial budgets, something like 67 out of 116 schools were being cut. And of the 67, 1/3 of them were schools east of the river.
Hmm.
That's just wrong. It's wrong if we want kids who come to school with challenges to learn. And every kid can learn. But I don't believe the chancellor really believes that. Or if he did, then he would provide additional resources to these schools rather than cutting them. So that's what the struggle's been there. We estimate that to give the schools, make sure that every school gets at least the same budget next year that they had this year. It'll take about $30 million. And I'm committed to try to solve that gap. The continuing with the status quo, which is schools that struggle year after year with declining enrollment and declining budgets, that's not a solution to educating our kids.
But my understanding was legislation was passed last year that would have kept the funding at a level, the floor being what was allocated the previous year. And I understand that there was trouble getting the chancellor and the mayor to follow through on that. So, these laws are on the books. How do we go about rectifying that this budget season?
Well, thank you for pointing that out. Yes, the law's on the books, and the chancellor made it clear that he wasn't going to follow the law this year. We could sue him, and I've thought about it. And the reality is that the court would say, well, in the end, the council is the one that appropriates the budget, so you can fix it. And so that's kind of where we are. It doesn't get the mayor off the hook. It doesn't excuse the chancellor. And I think that parents need to realize that when it comes to adequate resources in their schools, right now the chancellor is not their friend.
No doubt. Speaking about allocations, I've done my due diligence in collecting letters that your council colleagues sent to the mayor over the last few weeks. We had about nearly 500 requests, a little over $2 billion, and I saw flexible scheduling, the purchase of a building in Ward 3 for affordable housing. I saw a library and training center on the corner of 5th and Kennedy Street in Ward 4. And I saw, well, I didn't see this, but I did hear Councilmember Trayon White speak about housing with 4 or 5 bedrooms. Now, of course, to my knowledge, unless I missed something in reading the budget, a lot of these, if not all, did not make it. So, given our precarious financial situation, what is the next 50 days or so going to look like in meeting these requests? I mean, of course, that's not totally up to you, but, these don't really, these seem like more like investments, in the future for low income DC residents, people who are seeking services, something that goes beyond what we had as the status quo. So, what do the next 50 days look like in, balancing obligations to council colleagues who have been speaking to residents about these needs?
Well, let me say a couple of things. First, the council has roughly 50 days before it has to vote on the budget. And we're going to see committee hearings over the next month. And there's going to be a lot of struggle to see if money can be found to fund some of these initiatives. The reality is there's not room for a lot of initiatives. I think we can redistribute some of the cuts because we need to prioritize. For instance, public safety is critical, and education, particularly for at-risk kids, is critical. But maybe there's some things that we don't need or that we can put off. And for example, that new school in Ward 3 is a high school. It's already been purchased. It needs to open. What the mayor wants to do is fund it at a level that exceeds what its catchment area needs. And so I'm going to look skeptically on whether we really need those additional dollars for this school, particularly at this time. The Ward 3 affordable housing project is being pushed by advocates who are saying, look, we need to distribute affordable housing across the city and not just concentrate it in one area. And I think that's laudable. Um, Maybe if that's through the capital budget, we could fund that. Maybe we just don't fund it this year, that we put it off for a year. I think that public education is more urgent because the kids who don't get a quality education next year never get that year back.
Mhm.
And so I think that's a bit more urgent. So we will struggle with these priorities, but in the end, I don't think there's room for a lot of new initiatives. It's really just redistributing where the cuts are to better reflect our priorities.
Definitely. So, not much time left. Couple more things I wanted to touch on. In terms of the way that the matching funds were set up for public charter school teachers, I heard quite a mouthful from Ariel Johnson, who is the executive director of the DC Charter School Alliance. Um, she speaks for charter school teachers. They are not too happy with the way that it's set up. My understanding, once again, is that charters have to apply for matching funds through a grant, and then even with that, they don't receive back pay going 3 or 4 years. Instead, it's 1 or 2. Um, of course, the mayor's people explain the rationale behind that, but what is your take on that? The council, the council and the mayor, they said that they would take steps in making sure that there was equitable pay across the board, but this doesn't seem too equitable if charter schools have to apply through a grant process to get those matching funds.
Well, there actually is a rationale to that grant, and that is that council members have made it clear, and actually the charter school leaders have agreed that the money should go to teachers and not just to administrators or to fund the bottom line of these charter schools. If DCPS teachers are getting a raise, then charter teachers should be getting a raise. And the grant program is intended to ensure that that's what happens. Show me the school, show me what you're going to do with the money. When you show that it's going to go to the teachers, then we'll give you the money. That doesn't mean that the way that it's designed is right, and that's what we will look at. Um, and I'm also concerned that the funding equity between the two sectors is way out of balance. And I think the mayor's been a bit too clever to find ways to get more money to DCPS without honoring the per pupil funding formula, which is intended to ensure that money is distributed equally to the charter schools and DCPS on a per pupil basis. So that's what we'll be looking at that over the next 50 days, um, to with an eye toward making sure that this really is fair between the two sectors.
How has she been able to do that? If you wouldn't mind going into that, is that through like federal funds or as far as diverting more money to DCPS?
It's not through federal funds. It's there's a document, a bill that accompanies the budget called the Budget Support Act, and in the Budget Support Act, for example, they simply amend the law to say that the impact bonuses to go to DCPS teachers, which is basically pay, is outside of the funding formula, um, or to be paying the DCPS teachers contract uh, outside the UPSFF. That's the Uniform Per Pupil Funding Formula. Um, and it's going to be hard for us to ensure that it's dollar for dollar equal between the sectors, but we don't have to fund it all through we don't have to fund it all outside of the funding formula.
Respect. Before I let you go, because there was so much more that we can do, but hopefully down the line we can come back to the table. I
Yeah.
wanted to I wanted to speak about the free Metro Bus program. Now, since the initial um, revenue estimate came out, Mayor Bowser sent a letter. She said there were other things that came into question. For example, the Kids Ride Free program, Metro Access. what are you anticipating over the next 50 days? That seems like more expenses that might further legitimize her point about this not being the right time for a free metro bus program. But it seems like something that you and Councilmember Allen are very adamant about. What do you,
Well, I'm kind of baffled by the mayor's position. For the last several years, the mayor and the council have been fighting over whether to have free bus service for the circulator. We know the streetcar is free fare. Um, the council's not agreed with free fare on the circulator because it serves a lot of tourists and not as many DC residents. Last fall, the council working with, in fact, it was my office working with WMATA and the new general manager, hit upon doing free bus service for the district. It only serves DC bus routes, and DC bus routes are confined within the district. And we know that lower income residents make up, I think it's over half of the ridership on buses. Um, we know that free fare for bus service is good for equity. We know that it's good for encouraging more people to use public transit. We know that it's good for fighting traffic congestion. We know that it's good for making bus service more reliable in terms of its schedule because there are less delays with people waiting to get on board to pay their fare. It's good in so many different ways, but the idea didn't come from the mayor, and she has been tepid at best about it. So she sent a letter a week ago that basically made up a bunch of stuff, like that the Metro Access, which is for uh, disabled riders, was going to cost millions and millions of dollars. We know that that's actually not correct. And she raised a number of other concerns. She questioned the cost figures that Metro gave us. So she took the money out of the budget. We're going to try to put it back in. It may be that we will not be able to do this beginning July 1st, which is very disappointing. But what we've seen across the country is that cities increasingly are looking to have fare-free bus service. The mayor has supported this at other times. This is the right thing to do, and we're going to try to make sure it happens.
yes, yes, yes. And with that being said, I want to thank Council Chairman Phil Mendelson once again for joining us on this early Monday morning. I thought it was a good way to spend the Monday morning, start the week off. But in all seriousness, thank you so much for your time. I really think the audience got a lot out of this. We're going to be following the next 50 days or so what's happening at the council. Before we leave, can you just briefly explain the process? What's the roadmap to the passage of a budget bill?
Well, the committees, each of the committees is going to be looking at the proposed budgets for the agencies under their jurisdiction. And that takes place over the next roughly 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. Then the committee of the whole, which I chair, will be having a hearing on all of the legislation related to the budget. That's the Budget Support Act, the revisions to the current year budget, next year's proposed budget, the federal portion request act. That hearing, I believe, is April 14th. At the end of the month, the committees will be voting their recommendations to the committee of the whole on what changes, if any, should be made to the budgets, and there will be proposed changes. The council members will get together, I think it's the first week of May, in an informal work session to go through all of those recommendations. And we vote, I believe the first vote is May 14th. Because we now have what's called budget autonomy, we vote twice. So the first vote will be May 14th, the second vote May 28th. So there's lots of opportunity for members of the public to participate. If you have a concern, when I say you, I mean any of the viewers have a concern about a particular agency, Department of Transportation, Department of Health, contact the committee that's responsible, or go to the council's website, www.dccouncil.gov, and look up the hearing schedule and participate in the hearings.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you so much, Chairman Mendelson. And viewers, we hope that you got a lot out of this.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Please invite me back anytime. And next time I'm going to work on my lighting. So
Yes, sir.
it's
No
better.
problem. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Same to you.